The Gulf is on fire, literally. And if you think this is just another Middle Eastern conflict that doesn't touch your life here in America, let me tell you something right now. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly one-fifth of the world's entire oil supply flows every single day, has been shut down. Brent crude has already crossed $109 a barrel. The price of liquid natural gas for Asia, fertilizer for Africa, jet fuel for the airlines you fly on, all of it is being strangled at the throat. Traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has plunged from 150 vessels a day to just 10 to 20 ships a day. That is not a disruption, that is an economic siege on the entire planet. And it started on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched a coordinated surprise attack on Iran, assassinating Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and plunging the entire Persian Gulf into a war that is now entering its sixth week with no end in sight. The UAE's iconic Burj Al Arab has been hit by debris. Dubai Airport was struck. Qatar's world record-breaking LNG facility was attacked. Kuwait's largest oil refinery was set on fire. This is not a localized skirmish. This is a reshaping of the entire global order happening in real time. And most Americans have no idea how deep this goes. Let's start from the very beginning, because context is everything here. And without context, you are just watching smoke on a screen without understanding what the fire actually means. For years, decades really, Washington had a very clear strategic interest in the Persian Gulf. That interest was simple: keep the oil flowing, keep the regimes friendly or at least manageable, and make sure no single power in the region gets strong enough to challenge American dominance of that corridor. Iran, for its part, had been in the crosshairs since 1979. The Islamic Revolution was not just a theological event. It was a geopolitical earthquake that shattered America's grip on one of the most resource-rich countries on earth. And ever since, the relationship between Washington and Tehran has been defined by sanctions, proxy wars, covert operations, assassinations, and an endless cycle of escalation and attempted negotiation that never quite resolves itself. The nuclear deal, the maximum pressure campaign under Trump's first term, the failed diplomacy under Biden, all of it was a slow burn that finally became an explosion on that cold February morning. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel started a war with surprise airstrikes on sites and cities across Iran, assassinating Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and several other Iranian officials, and inflicting over 100 civilian casualties. Let that sink in for a moment. The Supreme Leader of a nation of 90 million people was killed in a targeted airstrike. This is not a surgical counterterrorism operation. This is war at the highest possible level of statecraft. And the response from Tehran was immediate, massive, and indiscriminate in its geographic reach. Iran responded with missile and drone strikes against Israel, US bases, and US allied countries in the Middle East, and by closing the Strait of Hormuz, which has disrupted global trade. The Iranians did not simply absorb the blow and retreat. They hit back with everything they had, and they hit in every direction at once. Now here is where it gets important, because this is the part that the mainstream American media is not giving you with sufficient depth. Iran's targeting strategy was deliberate and calculated. They were not just lashing out randomly in grief and anger. They were sending a very specific message to every country in the Gulf that had hosted American military assets and cooperated, openly or quietly, with the United States and Israel. Iran reported striking the US bases of Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, and the US Navy 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain. These are not obscure military installations. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar is the largest American air base in the entire Middle East. The 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain is the nerve center of American naval power projection throughout the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. Iran was saying very clearly to every Gulf monarchy, you are not neutral and you will not be treated as neutral. And then the war entered a truly new and alarming phase. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said that in the event of further attacks on Iran's sites, attacks on Gulf energy infrastructure will not stop until it is completely destroyed. That is not a diplomatic warning. That is a declaration of economic warfare against the entire global energy system, and they meant it. Iran attacked the world's biggest liquefied natural gas complex in Qatar, targeted a gas field and facility in the United Arab Emirates, fired missiles and launched drones on a Saudi Arabian oil refinery and on 2 Kuwaiti gas units. Think about what that means in practical terms for a moment. Qatar supplies LNG to Europe, to Japan, to South Korea, to countries that have absolutely no military dog in this fight, but whose heating, electricity, and industrial production depend on gas coming out of that peninsula. When Iran struck the Ras Laffan complex, it was not just attacking Qatar, it was attacking the global energy supply chain in a way that ripples out to every city, every factory, every home on earth that is plugged into that system. The UAE's response to all of this has been extraordinary in scale. As of April 4, 2026, the UAE has intercepted and destroyed 498 ballistic missiles, 2,141 drone attacks, and 23 cruise missiles fired from Iran using their THAAD and Patriot missile defense systems acquired from the United States. Read those numbers again. Nearly 500 ballistic missiles, over 2,100 drone attacks, and the Emiratis are still standing, still intercepting, still firing back with the American-supplied systems that form the backbone of Gulf Arab air defense. This is an unprecedented intensity of missile and drone warfare. The world has simply never seen anything like this outside of a full-scale world war. And yet, somehow, it has not yet become the lead story on every network, every morning, every single day in the United States. That tells you something about how news is filtered and framed, and it should give you pause. The human and economic consequences inside the UAE are beginning to mount. The attacks have killed 13 people, including 3 military personnel, and injured 217 others, ranging from minor to severe cases. Debris from intercepted missiles has hit residential towers in Dubai's Marina district, damaged the facade of the Burj Al Arab, caused fires at gas facilities in Habshan and Ajban. Sultan Al Jaber, chief executive of ADNOC, said that energy infrastructure has been targeted throughout the region, calling it global economic warfare. That phrase is worth dwelling on. Global economic warfare. Not a regional conflict, not a localized dispute, a deliberate campaign to destabilize the energy arteries that sustain the entire modern world economy. And it is working, at least partially, because oil prices are already surging and the ripple effects are moving through commodity markets around the globe. Qatar's situation is particularly fascinating and deeply uncomfortable from a geopolitical standpoint because Qatar had for years maintained a unique position in the Middle East. It hosted the largest American airbase in the region while simultaneously maintaining friendly relations with Iran and sharing with Tehran the world's largest natural gas field. Qatar and Iran signed a defense cooperation agreement and an internal security pact in 2010 and held joint military trainings. Qatar was the ultimate hedge player, playing both sides of the great power divide with remarkable finesse. But the February 28th attack shattered that careful balance. When American and Israeli jets flew out of or were coordinated through assets in Qatar, Iran concluded that there was no more neutrality. The gloves came off. On March 18th, Iran launched strikes targeting and hitting Qatar's massive natural gas facility, following which Qatar ordered Iran's military and security attachés, along with their staff, to leave the country within 24 hours. That is a fundamental rupture in a diplomatic relationship that had survived decades of regional turbulence. Qatar has now, whether it wanted to or not, been pulled fully into the American orbit, and it is paying an enormous price for that position. Now let's talk about Trump, because you cannot understand this war without understanding the man who chose to launch it and how he is managing, or mismanaging, its escalating consequences. Trump said the blocked strait didn't affect the US and told other countries that rely on it for fuel to get it reopened. That statement is breathtaking in its combination of arrogance and strategic incoherence. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a problem for Asia or Europe. American allies depend on it. Global commodity prices, which affect American consumers directly, are being driven by it, and the geopolitical credibility of the United States as a guarantor of international maritime order is on the line. To simply shrug and say it doesn't affect us is not toughness. It is a profound abdication of the responsibilities that come with being the world's leading power. And then there are the threats. Trump posted on social media that the US military hasn't even started destroying what's left in Iran, adding bridges next, then electric power plants. Legal experts were quick to note what this means under international law. Attacking civilian infrastructure that doesn't contribute to military action would be a war crime under international and US laws, according to legal experts. Asked by a reporter if he was concerned about committing a war crime, Trump said, "No, I hope I don't have to do it." There is something deeply chilling about that exchange. Not because it is surprising from Trump, but because it reveals the complete collapse of the moral and legal framework that the United States spent 70 years constructing after World War II. The Geneva Conventions, the laws of armed conflict, the norms around civilian protection, these were American inventions, largely, and here is the American president in real time dismissing them with a casual no. The Pentagon, meanwhile, is preparing for a long campaign. The Pentagon is seeking about $200 billion in additional funds after nearly 3 weeks of war with Iran. $200 billion. And that was 3 weeks in. We are now at 6 weeks. The financial cost of this war for American taxpayers is going to be staggering. And it is happening at a moment when the national debt is already at historic highs, and there are serious debates inside Washington about cutting domestic spending on healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The American people are being asked, implicitly, to finance a war that the president has not fully explained, whose objectives keep shifting, and whose end state nobody seems able to articulate clearly. The global economic damage is already measurable and severe. A United Nations Development Program report said gross domestic product in the Arab world was estimated to decline by approximately 3.7 to 6% after a month of war, equivalent to a contraction of $120 billion to $194 billion. That is just the Arab world. The secondary effects on Asian economies, European energy markets, African food security, because fertilizer prices are exploding right alongside oil, are going to compound that damage enormously. We are watching, in accelerated form, the kind of economic disruption that usually takes years to unfold, happening in weeks. Iran rejected a US ceasefire plan and countered with a proposal for a permanent end to the war. Egyptian officials told NPR that Iran is open to a 45-day ceasefire that guarantees a permanent end to the war, during which Iran would discuss opening the Strait of Hormuz. That is actually a meaningful signal. Iran is not saying it wants to fight forever. It is saying it wants guarantees, real guarantees, not promises, that this ends permanently and that the strait reopens as part of a negotiated settlement, not a unilateral Iranian capitulation. But the Trump administration has so far framed every Iranian counteroffer as obstruction rather than as a basis for negotiation. And that tells you something about what the actual objective of this war is, because if the goal were simply to stop Iran's nuclear program or reopen the strait, there is a negotiated path to that. If the goal is regime change, the total dismantlement of the Islamic Republic, then no ceasefire framework will ever be acceptable until that goal is achieved or abandoned. Ali Akbar Velayati, an advisor to Iran's newly appointed supreme leader, warned that Iran may target another key location in the Middle East for the passage of vessels, the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, tucked between Yemen and the Horn of Africa, connecting the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and Arabian Sea to the Suez Canal. If Iran, through the Houthis in Yemen, who have already re-entered this conflict, manages to threaten the Bab al-Mandeb as well, we are talking about the simultaneous disruption of two of the most critical maritime choke points on Earth. The Suez Canal route would be compromised, the Persian Gulf route is already compromised, global shipping would face a crisis unlike anything since World War II, and the price of everything, oil, gas, food, manufactured goods, would spike in ways that would hit American households directly and painfully. What you are watching unfold in the Gulf right now is not simply a war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. It is the collision of several historical forces that have been building for decades. The slow decline of American unipolar dominance, the rise of multipolarity, the desperation of a certain faction within the American and Israeli security establishments to settle the Iranian question once and for all before the window closes, and the deep structural fragility of a global economy built on the assumption of open sea lanes and stable energy prices. Iran, for all the damage it has absorbed, and it has absorbed enormous damage, losing its supreme leader, much of its military infrastructure, and large parts of its civilian economy, is still standing, still firing, still closing the strait, and still negotiating from a position that is not one of total defeat. That is remarkable. And it means this war is nowhere near its conclusion. The question that every American should be asking right now is not simply who is winning or losing. It is what kind of world is being built in the rubble of this conflict, and whether the people making decisions in Washington have a coherent answer to that question. Because from where things stand today, with 2 American jets downed, a $200 billion supplemental military budget request on the table, oil at $109 a barrel, the Strait of Hormuz essentially closed, and the president threatening to bomb Iranian power plants, it does not look like anyone in charge has thought clearly about what comes the morning after.